They didn't know whose daughter had been touched. When Chuck Norris walked into the school, everything changed. Watch to the end and write in the comments where you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun filtered through a hazy October sky, casting long shadows across the brick-paved drive of Liberty Ridge Academy. The campus, nestled among oaks and sculpted hedges, looked like a private estate more than a school. Its walls were red brick, tall and polished, lined with bronze plaques bearing the names of donors and alumni, a visible legacy of money and power. Students moved in clusters, some chatting loudly, others focused on their phones, many dressed in uniforms that had clearly been tailored rather than ordered in bulk. It was Monday, the first one of the month, and the rhythm of routine pulsed like clockwork. Haley Norris stepped onto campus with her hands deep in the pockets of a fitted navy blue jacket, the hood pulled slightly over her head. Her posture was upright, deliberate. She moved without hesitation, but not in a way that attracted attention. If anything, she seemed to blend into the background despite her tall frame and the coffee tone of her skin, uncommon in a school where nearly everyone else was pale, polished, and predictably affluent. No one noticed her last name. No one connected her to the man whose name had once been spoken with reverence across the globe. And that was exactly how she wanted it. To them, she was just a transfer student. 16, a junior from out of state. No clubs, no extracurriculars. A file that said she was academically excellent, socially limited, and under the legal guardianship of a man listed as Charles D. Norris. Nothing more. There were no red flags, no dramatic history. But even without the specifics, Liberty Ridge had its way of sensing difference, like a bloodhound sniffing out foreign scents. And Haley, despite her best efforts, was different. In the front office that morning, the receptionist offered her a faint smile as she handed over her schedule and locker combination. "Welcome to Liberty Ridge, Miss Norris. We hope you find your place here." Haley offered a polite nod and left without a word. Her first class was Honors U.S. History. The teacher, Mr. Bennett, introduced her in a flat tone, reading directly from the attendance sheet. "We have a new student joining us today, Haley Norris. She's from Arizona. Let's make her feel welcome." No one clapped. A few turned to glance. Haley gave a slight tilt of her head and took the empty seat near the window, sliding her backpack off her shoulder and opening her notebook with quiet precision. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't look at anyone longer than necessary. Liberty Ridge was not a place for invisibility. The school operated like a machine, each student a cog in the polished, gleaming image it projected to the outside world. Athletes, scholars, student government leaders, and future CEOs in training filled the hallways. Appearances mattered. Association mattered. And silence could be interpreted as arrogance or weakness, depending on the observer's mood. Within 3 days, Haley had learned the names that most students didn't say out loud unless they were bragging about being on their good side or warning others to stay clear. Jason Crawford, Trevor Bales, Chad Ryan. The trio didn't always walk together, but when they did, they owned the corridor. Jason led. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-cut hair that always looked freshly styled. He had the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to and obeyed. His smile was a weapon, sharp and deliberate. The way he held his phone, screen always facing outward, made it clear he was either recording or threatening to. Trevor was the enforcer. Muscular, loud, often laughing too hard at his own jokes. He bumped shoulders with underclassmen like it was his natural rhythm and always made it seem accidental. Chad was quieter, but never absent. He was the one you didn't notice at first, until you saw your face in a meme he'd made the night before. Rumors traced back to him like smoke to a fire. Haley had learned quickly. She mapped alternate routes between classes, spent her lunch period in the library or on the bleachers when the field was empty. She never sat next to the same person twice. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood. Violence wasn't always fists. Sometimes it was whispers, stares, exclusion, and she had been trained for many years not just in how to fight, but when not to. Each morning before school, she still rose at dawn. Out back behind the modest one-story house she shared with her father, she ran drills. Footwork, balance, breathing. Then came strength and form. The gym behind the garage had a worn punching bag, a mat, and mirrored walls that reflected her every move. Her father, Chuck Norris, was not there to instruct anymore. He trusted her discipline, but his voice remained, echoing through her memories. Control is the real strength. If you lose that, you've already lost. The rule was clear. You didn't fight for pride, you fought to protect, to survive, and only when no other option remained. Haley lived by that creed. By the end of her first week, she hadn't spoken more than a few full sentences to anyone. Her teachers noted her participation as minimal but respectful. Her scores on preliminary assessments placed her in the top 5% of the junior class, but no one could quite place her. Too quiet to be friendly, too composed to be awkward, too observant to be disinterested, and that unsettled people. In the cafeteria, someone muttered, "You ever see her smile? Maybe she thinks she's better than everyone. She gives off robot energy." Whispers, glances, testing. Haley never responded. The taunts escalated by inches. A tray bumped against her shoulder in the lunch line. Someone left a printed meme in her locker, a cartoon with the caption, "New girl scanning for emotion, nothing found." Chad's anonymous handle shared it in the student forum minutes later. The post racked up likes fast. She didn't report it. She didn't complain. She simply kept walking. That restraint, more than anything, made her a target. Jason's group wasn't used to being ignored. They thrived on reactions, control, fear, but Haley gave them nothing. No fear, no anger, no interest. She didn't laugh at their jokes or blush when they stared at her too long. She didn't even glance up when Jason whispered her name during AP English, voice laced with mock curiosity. Norris? Sounds familiar. Wasn't there a cowboy guy in some old movie? Or is she related to that guy who used to beat people up for blinking too slow? Silence. Haley's pen didn't pause. Trevor made it physical during PE class. They were lining up for relay races. He accidentally collided with her from behind, sending her a step forward. "Oh, sorry," he said, grinning. "Didn't see you there. You're so quiet, it's like you're invisible." Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough to echo. Still, she said nothing. In the library, Chad took a photo of her while she sat alone with a textbook. The caption beneath the image, posted later in the student chat, read, "Default Schoolbot Mode, Analyzing Human Behavior." It circulated through the school within hours. That evening, back home, Haley entered the gym. She wrapped her hands, pulled on her gloves, and went to work on the punching bag. Each hit was measured. She exhaled with every impact, her breath sharp and purposeful. It was not rage, it was release. Chuck appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching silently. He didn't speak until she stopped. Sweat ran down her temple, her chest rising and falling in rhythm. "You hold it in well," he said finally, "but don't let silence become a burden. You don't have to suffer in order to be strong. You just have to know why you're choosing what you choose." Haley wiped her face and nodded. She wasn't sure she believed it fully, but she wanted to. That had to be enough. At Liberty Ridge, silence wasn't seen as strength. It was provocation, and it was only a matter of time before someone decided to push further. The following Tuesday, she approached her locker and found the lock jammed with something sticky. The smell of minty gum mixed with an acidic chemical scent. She tried to turn the dial, but it wouldn't budge. Gum, mashed and forced into the mechanism. She reported it to the front office. The janitor arrived with his toolkit and a tired smile. "Freshman prank," he said. "Happens every year. You're not the first." Haley didn't argue. She sat on the bench in the hallway and began her homework while he worked. Chad passed by minutes later and made a show of noticing. "Bummer. Hope your robot programming doesn't short-circuit from the delay." Laughter. A few students paused to listen. Haley ignored him, but she felt the air shift. It wasn't a prank anymore. It was a test, and they had decided she was the subject. By Friday, it had worsened. In the girls' locker room, she changed quickly and efficiently, always turning to the wall, but whispers followed, snickers, questions spoken just loud enough to be heard. She doesn't talk. Maybe she's hiding a tattoo, or scars, or a microphone. When she exited the locker room, she found Trevor waiting near the door. "Careful," he called out, smiling broadly. "The new girl doesn't like changing with the rest of us. What are you afraid we'll see?" More laughter. Haley didn't stop walking, but the weight of the corridor pressed in. That night, a new meme appeared on the student network. A ninja cat wearing a headband. The text read, "Norris doesn't speak. Norris strikes." No one signed it. But the first person to share it was Chad Ryan. Haley didn't react, and that, more than anything, was what drew Jason's full attention. She didn't know it yet, but plans were already being made. Plans to break the silence, and to push her past a line they believed she wouldn't cross. The meme had been up for less than 2 hours, but by the time Haley saw it, it had already made the rounds across nearly every student's screen. A poorly drawn digital cartoon of a black cat wearing a ninja headband crouched as if ready to strike was accompanied by a caption that read, "Norris doesn't speak. Norris explodes." It was crude, childish, and unremarkable in its construction, but it struck something deeper, not because of its quality or even its intention, but because of its persistence. The school didn't need the meme to laugh. They only needed the implication. And implications at Liberty Ridge were more dangerous than facts. Haley didn't flinch when she saw it on the screen of a girl sitting beside her in the library. She merely lowered her gaze to her notes and continued writing. Her pen didn't waver, though her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the page. She was used to silence. She had built a life on discipline, on structure, on restraint. But the laughter that followed her out of the library wasn't imagined this time. It was there, loud, clear, and intentional. She knew the meme came from Chad. The watermark on the bottom corner was his usual tag, a stylized lowercase CR embedded in a pixelated camera. He hadn't even tried to hide it. It wasn't about secrecy anymore. It was about dominance. This wasn't just bullying. It was performance. Public humiliation, packaged as a joke to entertain those who needed a target. On Monday, her gym locker had been scratched. The word robot had been etched into the metal with what looked like a key or a coin. It wasn't deep enough to raise alarms, but just enough to leave a mark. When she reported it, the coach barely looked up from his clipboard. "Locker assignments change every year. You'll survive." No offer to investigate, no concern, just a shrug and dismissal. By Tuesday, someone had taken it further. A small pile of mechanical screws and wires had been scattered across her desk in computer science class. No one claimed it. The teacher laughed. "Looks like someone thinks you need to spare parts, Miss Norris." Even some of the students who weren't directly involved began participating by omission, looking the other way, giggling quietly, pretending not to see what was happening. At Liberty Ridge, it was safer to align with power than to question it. It wasn't that Haley expected better. She had lived long enough to understand that fairness was rarely the default. But she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that ignoring them would be enough. That by not reacting, she would make herself uninteresting, not worth the effort. She had miscalculated. In martial arts, the first lesson she ever learned was about balance. Not physical balance, but emotional. Anger was not a weapon. Fear was not a weakness. Both were tools, but only when understood. She had learned to breathe through confrontation, to ground herself before acting, but nothing in her training had prepared her for the persistent erosion that came with being dehumanized day by day, not by fists, but by 100 invisible cuts. Still, she didn't lash out. At home, her routine remained the same. Up at dawn, stretching, drills, controlled strikes on the bag. The garage gym was her sanctuary, and the sound of her fists against the worn canvas echoed like a language only she and her father understood. Chuck watched her, sometimes silently, other times offering a correction or a word of encouragement. But even he had begun to notice the shift. "You're holding more tension in your shoulders," he said one evening, handing her a towel after a session. "You're carrying more than just weight, Haley." "I'm fine," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. He didn't push. He never did. But his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than usual before he nodded and stepped away. Wednesday brought another escalation. In the middle of lunch, while Haley sat alone near the back corner of the cafeteria, someone dropped a folded napkin on her tray. Inside was a printed photo, one of her taken from behind as she bent to tie her shoe near the lockers. On the back, scribbled in black ink, were the words, "Built to kneel, just say when." The message was disgusting, not overtly sexual in a way that could be reported with certainty, but sharp, vile, and deliberate in its suggestion. She looked up quickly, scanning the room. Jason, Trevor, and Chad sat at their usual table near the front, surrounded by admirers, laughing and tapping away on their phones. Chad met her gaze briefly and smirked. She folded the napkin in half and placed it neatly on the side of her tray. Then she stood, dumped the rest of her lunch into the trash, and walked out. Her steps were slow, measured, but her pulse pounded in her ears. In the hallway, students stepped aside as she passed, not out of respect, but the kind of quiet curiosity reserved for watching a pressure valve inch toward explosion. She spent the remainder of lunch in the nurse's office pretending to have a headache. The nurse offered her a bottle of water and a cot. Haley lay down, staring at the ceiling, counting her breaths. That night, she didn't speak much at dinner, Chuck noticed. "Something happened at school?" She shook her head. "Same as always." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. Finally, he pushed his plate away and leaned forward. "You know I can help, right? Whatever it is, you don't have to take it alone." "I know," she said, and she meant it. But she also knew that part of her wanted to endure it, to prove, to herself, to them, that she could. The next morning brought rain. Gray skies, puddles forming near the stone steps of the school. Haley's hood was up as she entered the building, but the chill in the air did nothing to cool the heat under her skin. She had barely reached her locker when she saw it. Someone had spray-painted a crude outline of a humanoid figure on the floor in front of it. A circle for a head, rectangles for limbs, and a blocky torso with an X in the center. Error 404, human not found, written above in dripping letters. She stared at it for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stepped over it, opened her locker, and grabbed her books. In first period, Jason stood behind her desk for a moment too long, pretending to look for his pen. His hand brushed against her shoulder, lingering just enough to be noticed. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. But the other students around them exchanged glances. She didn't even react, one whispered. That's creepy. By now, the narrative had begun to shift. Haley wasn't just quiet. She was now unnerving, unpredictable, a ticking time bomb. Some students avoided sitting near her. Others whispered stories that bordered on myth, claiming she once snapped a boy's arm in her last school or that she was expelled from a military academy for assault. None of it was true. But truth was irrelevant once a story took root. At home that night, she sat on the back steps in the rain, the hood of her sweatshirt pulled low. The sky was dark, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Chuck joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. He didn't speak at first. He simply handed her one and sat beside her. "Bad day?" he asked. She sipped. "Not worse than the last one." He nodded slowly, watching the rain fall. "You're stronger than they know." "They don't care about strength," she said. "They just want to break something." Chuck looked at her then, his eyes steady. "Then don't give them anything they can use." She nodded, but deep down, she felt it. Something cracking. Not breaking, not yet, but close. The silence she had wielded so well was beginning to feel less like armor and more like a cage. Friday arrived with a strange calm. Nothing new happened that morning. No messages, no pranks, no words, but she could feel it in the air. Something was coming. And this time they wouldn't just be testing her patience, they would be testing her boundary. It started like any other afternoon. After 4th period, Haley made her way to the east wing of Liberty Ridge Academy, where the performing arts classroom sat quiet between scheduled events. A rehearsal for the upcoming school assembly had run long, and she had been tasked, reluctantly and without choice, with helping Mr. Falcone organize some leftover props. She didn't argue. Arguing never helped. Instead, she accepted the clipboard, made a few quiet notes, and stayed behind after most students had already left for lunch. The east wing was the most remote part of the building, an older section that had been renovated but remained underused. The hallways there were narrower, the walls lined with outdated posters and framed photos of student plays from decades past. The staircase leading to the back exit was often empty, particularly during lunch hours, and the security cameras didn't reach all its corners. She moved down the hallway with a steady, measured pace. Her shoes made almost no sound on the polished linoleum. The door to the old storage room creaked when she opened it, and for a moment the smell of dust and varnish filled her nose. Inside, she began stacking small foam swords and rolled-up painted backdrops along the designated shelves. Her mind wandered, not to the meme from earlier in the week or to the spray-painted symbol outside her locker, but to the rain the night before. The way her father had sat beside her without asking for more than she could give. That silence had felt different. Not oppressive, but supportive. Not demanding, but accepting. She had just finished setting the last prop on the rack when she heard it. A faint click. Not loud, subtle. The sound of a door closing behind her, gently, almost thoughtfully. She froze. The world around her shifted. That simple noise, too careful to be accidental, sliced through the quiet like a knife. Haley turned slowly. The hallway was now empty, the stairwell door sealed. She stepped out, glancing toward the far end. Then came the footsteps. Soft, padded, intentional. She had heard that sound before. Not here, not in school, but during sparring drills with her father. He had taught her how to recognize it, the muted rhythm of someone trying not to be heard. Another step. Then 3 shadows appeared. Jason stood first, leaning lazily against the stair railing, his expression casual in the way a cat watches a cornered mouse. He wore his usual smirk, phone already in hand, camera lens pointed down at his thigh but angled just enough to record. Chad sat on the ledge of the landing, idly flipping a coin between his fingers, gaze unreadable. Trevor was closest, just 3 steps above Haley, broad shoulders filling the narrow stairwell. "Haley," Jason said. His voice dripped with theatrical warmth. "You always seem to be rushing somewhere. Maybe you should slow down." The air thickened. Trevor smiled, that same lopsided grin that had accompanied every offhand insult since her first week. "Nothing personal. We're just bored." Haley didn't respond. She didn't flinch. Her fingers remained relaxed at her sides, but her stance shifted ever so slightly. Weight evenly distributed, knees unlocked, breath controlled. "That's the problem," Chad muttered, voice low. "She never reacts. It's like she doesn't even care we're here." Jason tilted his phone upright now, thumb hovering over the screen. No anger, no fear. It's like we don't even exist to her. Trevor took a step forward. Maybe we should help her feel something. And then he moved closer, one foot landing just behind hers. She didn't turn. She didn't speak, but she felt it. His hand sliding along the curve of her back, slow, deliberate, hovering low, too low. A violation cloaked in pretense. In that instant, the teachings her father had drilled into her each morning, every philosophy about patience, restraint, and dignity, faded beneath a singular pulse of clarity. She acted. In one fluid motion, she spun on the ball of her foot, seized Trevor's wrist with her left hand, and twisted it backward at an angle that forced his body to follow. The tendons strained beneath her grip. He gasped, but before he could react, her right arm came up, driving a firm strike into the meat of his shoulder. It didn't break anything, but it unbalanced him. Then came the knee. Not brutal, not reckless, precise. It struck the inside of his thigh where the muscle was soft and vulnerable. His legs buckled. He crumpled, falling with a sharp grunt against the step. Jason jolted upright, surprised but not yet alarmed. Chad dropped the coin. Haley stepped back, breathing evenly. Trevor writhed on the floor, clutching his leg, his face contorted in pain. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jason snapped, lunging forward with a wide, clumsy punch. It was untrained, emotional, lazy. Haley ducked her head slightly, letting the punch sail above her shoulder. She stepped to the side, caught Jason's elbow with her left hand, and delivered a sharp jab with her right into the soft edge of his jaw. He stumbled backward, stunned. Still not enough to injure. Only enough to silence. Then he made his second mistake. He grabbed her shirt. Haley didn't hesitate. Her hands shot up between his arms, breaking the grip. She dropped her center of gravity, turned her hips, and flipped him over her shoulder using his own momentum. He hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs with a pathetic wheeze. Chad stood now, frozen at the top of the stairs, his phone in hand, trembling. Don't come near me," he stammered. Haley didn't advance. She stood between the two groaning bodies, eyes calm, breathing steady. "Don't touch me again," she said. Her voice was low, even, not raised, not cracking. A statement, not a plea. "Don't say my name. Don't film me. Don't pretend I don't know exactly what you are." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked away, her steps echoing down the hallway. At the far end, unseen by her, a figure ducked back into the shadows. Lena Brooks, with a phone in her hand, heart pounding against her ribs. She had come to return a clipboard to Mr. Falcone. She had seen everything, and she had captured it all. 2 hours later, Haley sat in silence across from the principal, Miss Darnell, in the administration building. Her backpack rested by her feet. Her clothes were tidy, her posture perfect, her hands clasped in her lap. Across the desk sat the vice principal, Mr. Cooper, and the student affairs director, Miss Reed. A laptop was open between them, paused on a video frame, Jason hitting the ground, Trevor curled on the step, Chad in the background, gaping. "Miss Norris," Miss Reed began, her voice carefully moderated. "We've reviewed the footage from the east stairwell. What we saw was deeply concerning." Haley didn't blink. She expected this. "What you did," Cooper added, "was not self-defense as far as the video shows. You attacked 3 students." "They surrounded me," Haley said, calm but firm. "One of them touched me inappropriately." "There's no video of that," Miss Darnell replied quickly. "No sound, no corroboration. They closed the distance. They blocked the stairs. One of them grabbed my back." "That's not visible in the footage," Cooper repeated. "They brought phones," Haley said. "They planned it." The adults exchanged glances. "The boys have all submitted written statements," Miss Reed continued. "They allege that you provoked them, that you became violent without warning." Haley didn't argue. She simply nodded once, understanding. "We have no choice," Miss Darnell said. "You'll be suspended for 3 days, pending further investigation." Haley rose to her feet. "We'll need to speak with your father," Cooper added. "Please have him come in tomorrow morning." "I will." She walked out without slamming the door, without sighing, without allowing a single tear to rise. She didn't cry. Not when she stepped out into the open courtyard. Not when students whispered in the halls, staring as if they had always suspected she was unhinged. Not when she stepped onto the public sidewalk outside the gates of Liberty Ridge, pulling her hood over her head as the wind picked up. Only when she sat on the back porch that evening, knees hugged to her chest, did she allow herself to breathe. And when her father appeared in the doorway with that look, quiet, steady, knowing, she finally looked up and whispered, "I got suspended." He sat beside her without a word. She told him everything, not embellished, not softened, just the truth. And when she was done, the sky had darkened into velvet, and the lights in the kitchen flickered behind them. "They want me there tomorrow?" Chuck asked. She nodded. He looked out at the lawn, jaw set. "Then we'll go," he said, and in his voice was something deeper than anger. It was a promise. The air inside the principal's office was deceptively calm, like the sterile stillness of a hospital waiting room moments before a difficult diagnosis. The lights hummed faintly above, casting a clinical glow across the walnut desk and the muted gray carpet. Outside the tall windows, morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds, striping the floor with light and shadow like a chessboard where the game had already begun. Chuck Norris sat upright in the guest chair across from the desk, his frame relaxed but unmistakably solid, one boot planted firmly over the other knee. He wore a faded military jacket over a black shirt and jeans. There were lines in his face that time and battle had carved, and none of them softened his expression. Beside him, Haley sat quietly, her hands folded over her thighs, her face composed, but her jaw tight. On the other side of the desk sat Principal Madeline Darnell, flanked by Vice Principal Cooper and Student Affairs Director Elise Reed. Their expressions were practiced, calm, formal, carefully arranged. No one raised their voice. No one tapped a pen. But tension sat thick between them like mist in a room that refused to clear. Mr. Cooper cleared his throat first. "Mr. Norris, thank you for coming in on short notice." Chuck inclined his head, saying nothing. "As you're aware," continued Miss Reed, her voice delicate, "your daughter was involved in a physical altercation yesterday that left 3 of her classmates with minor injuries." Chuck looked at Haley for a beat, then returned his gaze to the adults. "Yes," he said evenly. "She told me." Principal Darnell opened a folder in front of her. "We reviewed the hallway surveillance footage. It clearly shows your daughter engaging in physical aggression toward the boys. Based on what we saw, we had no choice but to issue a temporary suspension." Chuck leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the arms of the chair. "Did you ask her what happened before she defended herself?" Miss Reed blinked. "We reviewed the video and spoke with the other students involved, but not her." The silence was small but telling. "She admitted to the use of force," Principal Darnell said, regaining her composure. "We had no reason to doubt the statements of the boys, and her own words aligned with the physical outcomes." Chuck's face remained expressionless, but something behind his eyes narrowed. "You chose not to hear her side before issuing punishment." "We followed protocol," Mr. Cooper said. Chuck nodded slowly. Then, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket, he retrieved a small flash drive. "You followed a version of the truth, not the full one." Principal Darnell hesitated. "And what is that?" "Evidence," he said simply. "Footage from the other angle, full context." Miss Reed's brow furrowed. "There was no other camera on that stairwell." Chuck didn't respond to her. He simply placed the flash drive on the desk and slid it forward. The room was silent for several long seconds before Principal Darnell gestured to Mr. Cooper, who plugged the drive into the laptop and opened the video file. Haley sat still, eyes forward, her pulse pounding. She hadn't seen the footage herself. Lena had sent it directly to Chuck late the night before. An anonymous email, no message attached, no name, only the file. Chuck had watched it 3 times before sunrise and hadn't said a word until he looked up from the screen with eyes that burned not with anger, but purpose. The video loaded. It was shaky at first. Filmed from the upper floor landing, the angle slightly tilted, the audio tinny but clear. It began with Haley stepping into the stairwell, followed moments later by the 3 boys closing in. Jason's voice was unmistakable, smooth and mocking. "You always seem to be rushing somewhere." Then came Trevor's approach, the camera catching the unmistakable motion of his hand on her back. It wasn't ambiguous. The angle, though imperfect, showed intention. The laughter from Chad. The unfolding of the moment, frozen now in digital time, played out as clearly as any court testimony. Haley's response was swift, precise, measured. There was no flailing, no rage, only self-defense. Each movement calculated, each counter deliberate. The video ended with Chad's wide-eyed fear and the sound of Jason groaning on the floor. The room stayed quiet. Principal Darnell's lips were pressed together tightly, her eyes fixed on the screen even after the video ended. Mr. Cooper looked away. Miss Reed exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding too long. Chuck broke the silence. "This is what you chose not to see." Principal Darnell swallowed. "We weren't aware of this recording." Chuck leaned back in his chair. "Because you didn't look. Because you didn't ask if someone else might have seen it. Because you didn't want to know. You wanted a clean solution to a messy situation, and my daughter was the easiest one to isolate." Mr. Cooper shifted uncomfortably. "We made a decision based on the information we had at the time." "Then your process is broken," Chuck said calmly, "and it nearly let 3 boys get away with harassment and assault." Miss Reed reached for the mouse, replaying a segment of the footage as if hoping it would change. It didn't. The evidence stood, unshakable. "We'll need to contact the school board," Principal Darnell murmured. "Yes," Chuck agreed. "You will." Miss Reed hesitated. "Mr. Norris, may I ask how you came into possession of this?" "It was sent anonymously," Chuck said. "Someone who decided they were tired of watching cowards win." He didn't name Lena. He wouldn't. Whoever had sent the footage had done so knowing the risk. That kind of bravery deserved protection. Principal Darnell sat back, her posture no longer stiff but weary. "We will open a new investigation, and Haley's suspension will be lifted immediately, pending review of the other students' conduct." "Not good enough," Chuck said quietly. "I want accountability, not just correction." She looked at him, startled. "Excuse me?" Chuck rose to his feet. "You didn't just fail my daughter. You failed every student in this school who's been silenced, cornered, or told to ignore what's wrong because speaking up makes too much noise. You failed them when you made assumptions, when you sided with money instead of truth, and when you sat here ready to brand her as dangerous without listening." Miss Reed stood as well. "Mr. Norris, please understand." "I understand," Chuck interrupted, "and I'll make sure the board does too." Then he turned to Haley. "Let's go." She stood, her face unreadable. As they stepped into the hallway, the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them. The fluorescent lights of the corridor hummed overhead. Students passed by, whispering, staring, some with curiosity, some with unease. Haley walked beside her father, her spine straight, her eyes forward. When they reached the car, she finally asked, "Are you mad?" Chuck opened the door for her, waited until she got in, then slid behind the wheel. For a moment, he didn't answer. "No," he said finally, "I'm disappointed." Her heart clenched. "In them," he clarified, "not you." She didn't speak, but when he started the engine, she looked out the window with something new tightening in her chest. Not shame, not fear, but the ache of being seen and defended. The rest of the day passed in quiet. She didn't go back to school. Instead, she spent the afternoon on the back lawn, running through her forms slowly, breathing with intention. Every movement grounded her. Meanwhile, inside the house, Chuck sat at the dining room table with his laptop open. He wasn't finished. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as he began researching. Jason Crawford, son of Senator David Crawford, major donor to the school's athletic department. Trevor Bales. His father owned a regional security contracting firm, Liberty Tactical. Another name on the brass donor wall by the gym. Chad Ryan. His grandfather sat on the Liberty Ridge Board of Governors, the same board that approved staff appointments and discipline policy. Chuck closed the laptop. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were clear. This wasn't just about Haley anymore. It was about a system. That night, he picked up the phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a retired military attorney who now specialized in education law and civil rights. "I have something you need to see," Chuck said, "and I want to make sure the right people do too." By Sunday morning, the file had been encrypted and sent to multiple recipients, just in case. He wasn't going to let silence win. Not this time. Sunday came and went with little noise, but not without movement. Inside the Norris house, everything remained calm on the surface, yet there was an energy to the quiet, a current running beneath the stillness. Haley moved through her day in thoughtful silence, sticking to her routines, helping her father in the kitchen, polishing the old wooden floors, checking over school assignments even though she had technically been suspended. Nothing was said about Monday, but they both knew it would bring change. Chuck remained occupied most of the day, his voice low as he took several phone calls, his expression unreadable as he coordinated with the attorney he'd called the night before. That night, while Haley stood in the backyard, her face turned to the breeze, Chuck stepped into his study where his computer pinged with a new message. The return address was cloaked in anonymity. truthstreamwish@protonmail.com. No subject line, no message, only a single attached file. The same one he had received before, but with a higher resolution and this time, time-stamped metadata proving the video was captured in real time, directly from a student phone. It was concrete, undeniable. He clicked play one more time and watched the footage unfold again, not to reassure himself, not to relive it, but to prepare. Every frame was seared into his mind now. Jason's posture, Trevor's hand, Chad's laughter, and above them in the top corner of the frame, the unmistakable outline of a slender girl with auburn hair and red headphones. He knew who she was now. He hadn't asked her to step forward, and he wouldn't. If truth was going to come out, it would do so on her terms. Monday arrived briskly, with an early October chill in the wind. The morning sun hung low over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the flagstone courtyard of Liberty Ridge Academy. It was barely 10 a.m. when Chuck and Haley pulled into the school's visitor parking, stepping out of the truck side by side. Chuck wore a weathered olive shirt, his military service patch faint but visible. Haley had her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair tied back, her face composed but alert. Today was the scheduled disciplinary review hearing, but it wouldn't go the way the school expected. In the third-floor conference room, the air was heavy with tension even before anyone spoke. A long oak table stretched across the room, flanked by high-backed leather chairs. Bottles of water sat evenly spaced in front of each seat, and a projector screen flickered in the background, waiting. At one end of the room, Principal Darnell sat beside Vice Principal Cooper and Miss Reed. Alongside them, seated in rigid formation, were three well-dressed adults, the parents of Jason, Trevor, and Chad. Senator Crawford's pale eyes roamed the room as if he owned it. Mrs. Bales, in pearls and silk, clutched a leather folio. Mr. Ryan, the board governor, tapped his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. And at the far end of the table, representing the school board, sat Mr. Lionel Graves, a reserved man in a charcoal suit with silver-framed glasses. His presence alone added weight to the room, though he had spoken only a few words since arriving. He was the final voice in any matter involving serious accusations, especially those threatening the reputation of the institution. When Chuck and Haley entered, all eyes turned. Chuck's steps were calm, deliberate, each one echoing in the room. He pulled out a chair for Haley first, then seated himself without a word. No one greeted them. No one offered small talk. Principal Darnell cleared her throat and began. "Thank you all for coming. We're gathered to revisit the incident involving Haley Norris and 3 of her classmates. After reviewing the original security footage and the subsequent statements made by all parties, we determined that a full disciplinary hearing was appropriate." Senator Crawford nodded curtly. "I trust we'll be resolving this quickly. Jason is already suffering reputational harm from these baseless rumors." Chuck raised a hand. It wasn't abrupt, it wasn't confrontational, but it silenced the room instantly. "If I may," he said, "before any assumptions are made or repeated, I'd like to show something." Principal Darnell stiffened. "Mr. Norris, this is a formal proceeding. You are not scheduled to present—" Mr. Graves spoke for the first time. "Let him speak." Chuck reached into his bag and retrieved a small USB drive. He stood, walked to the projector, and inserted it into the laptop. For a moment, the screen remained blank. Then it flickered to life. What followed was undeniable. The full footage played without cuts, without ambiguity. Every word spoken by the boys, every calculated move, the mocking tones, the invasive gesture, the deliberate act of filming a confrontation. And then Haley's response, controlled, efficient, defensive, and non-lethal. The camera shook but captured enough. And, above it all, the audio was clear. Clear enough to leave no room for misinterpretation. By the time the video ended, the room had changed. Senator Crawford had stopped tapping his pen. Mrs. Bales had gone pale, her lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. Mr. Ryan leaned back, his jaw clenched, but said nothing. Principal Darnell was visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Graves looked at her. "Were you aware of this footage?" She hesitated. "It wasn't part of the original file review." "Did anyone on your staff make an effort to seek out witnesses who might have recorded the event?" Silence. Chuck's voice was quiet but firm. "They didn't want to find the truth. They wanted the problem to go away." "Mr. Norris," Miss Reed began, but he shook his head. "No. You had every opportunity to do right by my daughter. You had a responsibility to her and every student in this school. You ignored that duty. You took the words of 3 privileged boys over a girl who has never once caused trouble, never once raised her voice, never once broken a rule." His gaze swept the room. "You talk about discipline, about honor, but you were willing to sacrifice her for convenience." No one answered. Mr. Graves finally broke the silence. "I'll be requesting a formal review of the handling of this case. The suspension is to be expunged from Miss Norris's record immediately, and disciplinary actions will be taken against the other students involved." Mrs. Bales gasped. "Trevor is a good boy. He didn't mean any harm." Mr. Graves didn't look at her. "Intent does not erase consequence." Senator Crawford stood. "This is outrageous. We donate generously to this school. You're willing to jeopardize that over a girl who told the truth and defended herself?" Chuck's voice cut through, level and clear. "Yes, that's exactly what you should be doing." Jason's face was blank. Trevor looked down at his hands. Chad didn't meet anyone's eyes. Principal Darnell spoke again, but her voice was barely audible. Perhaps the security review team overlooked. Chuck turned to her. This wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. Mr. Graves stood. Meeting adjourned. People rose slowly, disoriented by the shift in power. Chuck looked at Haley. She hadn't moved the entire time. Her hands rested on the table, her fingers steady. As they left the room together, she didn't say a word. but her shoulders, for the first time in weeks, sat a little straighter. Out in the hallway, the tension followed them like fog. Other students watched from a distance, murmuring. News traveled fast at Liberty Ridge. "Are you okay?" Chuck asked as they walked to the truck. She nodded. "Yeah." In the parking lot, as Chuck opened the door for her, she turned. "Do you think it's really over?" He smiled slightly. "No, but the truth's out, and now they have to face it." That afternoon, emails were sent to faculty and parents. An internal investigation was announced. Darnell was placed on temporary administrative leave. Mr. Cooper was reassigned. Miss Reed remained under observation. Haley returned to school the next day. The halls were different. Not in volume. Students still whispered, still stared, but in tone. There was no mockery now, no snickering, just a quiet wait, a silence born of confrontation. No one said her name with a sneer. No one bumped her shoulder. Even Jason, once surrounded by admirers, now sat at a corner table with only 2 classmates. Trevor kept his distance. Chad walked with his head down. None of them spoke to her. And that was fine. Haley walked through the halls not as a victim, not as a threat, but as someone who had held her ground. It wasn't pride that filled her chest. It was peace. When she passed the library, a familiar figure looked up from the circulation desk. Lena. Red headphones around her neck, eyes wary but steady. Haley paused for half a second. Their eyes met, and that was enough, because the truth had come out, not through rage or vengeance, but through courage and choice. And the silence that once haunted Liberty Ridge had finally been broken. Haley returned to Liberty Ridge the day after the disciplinary hearing with no expectations and no illusions. She knew the truth had been seen, but that didn't mean the world would turn kind overnight. Truth was not magic. It didn't erase history or transform people. But it did something quieter, something slower. It shifted the ground beneath them. It made it harder for the lies to keep standing. The moment she stepped through the school's front doors, she felt the difference. The air was not hostile. It wasn't warm either. It was hesitant. The murmur of students lowered to a hum as she passed. Eyes followed her, not with mockery, but with careful curiosity. She could feel them questioning what they'd believed, what they'd whispered, what they'd laughed at. No one blocked her path. No one brushed her shoulder. In that silence, there was no longer ridicule. There was recognition. She walked with the same deliberate gait, her posture unchanged, her face calm. Her backpack swung lightly with each step, and her hands stayed loose at her sides. She didn't seek eye contact, but she didn't avoid it either. She moved through the hallways not as someone reclaimed, but as someone unshaken. It wasn't triumph that followed her. It was gravity. In the middle of third period, an announcement came through the speakers, short and formal. "Haley Norris, please report to the counselor's office. Haley Norris to the counselor's office." She didn't tense. She didn't wonder. She simply gathered her things and went. When she arrived, Miss Avery, one of the student counselors, greeted her at the door. She was younger than the others, with expressive eyebrows and a kind face. She offered Haley a gentle smile. "Come in," she said. "We won't keep you long." Inside sat 2 people she didn't expect. Miss Reed, the director of student affairs, and Mr. Graves, the board representative. Haley entered without a word and sat in the chair they indicated. She folded her hands and waited. Mr. Graves, always formal, spoke first. "Miss Norris, we've been reviewing the broader effects of what happened last week. In the course of that, your name came up in connection to several student-led requests. One in particular we'd like to discuss with you directly." Haley said nothing. Miss Reed took over. For some time now, the school's Women's Safety Initiative has been underfunded and underutilized. There used to be a self-defense group years ago, but it faded out. In light of recent events, several students have expressed interest in reviving it. Your name came up more than once as someone they'd trust to lead it. The room grew quiet. Haley looked from one to the other. "I'd be a student, not a teacher," she said. "Correct," said Mr. Graves. "But given your experience, your poise, and your conduct in an extremely difficult situation, we believe you'd be a powerful peer instructor. It would be entirely voluntary. You'd have faculty oversight, of course, but the program would center on student leadership." Haley considered this. Not the logistics, that was easy. She could teach, she had the training, she could explain holds and leverage and breath control. But the deeper question echoed inside her. Did she want to be seen now? To be visible, not as a warning, but as a guide? "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady. "I accept." Miss Reed smiled with relief. Mr. Graves nodded. "We'll coordinate with you to set up the first meeting." Haley left the office with a small folder of information, a new key to the auxiliary gym, and a schedule. The first session was already posted, Thursday after school, open to all. Word spread quickly. By lunch, students were already talking. Not loudly, not mockingly, curiously. Flyers went up. A post appeared on the school's internal bulletin board. Self-Defense Club reopens, led by Haley Norris. By Thursday, over 20 students arrived. Most were girls, freshmen and sophomores mostly, but a few juniors came too. One or two boys stood awkwardly at the edges of the room, unsure whether they belonged. Haley welcomed everyone without speeches, without drama. She simply nodded, pointed to the padded mats, and began. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture or intimidate. She demonstrated. "If someone grabs your wrist from the front," she said, and extended her arm, "you do this." She moved, slow and clean, breaking free from the hold with a twist and pivot. "If someone grabs you from behind..." She guided a younger girl through the motion, adjusting her stance with quiet precision. Students began to mirror her. They took notes. They asked questions. And slowly they tried. At the end of the session, no one rushed to leave. They lingered, talking softly, laughing a little, their movements more confident than before. Haley stayed to clean up, stacking mats and returning gloves to the shelf. As she bent to collect a towel, someone approached the doorway. It was Trevor. He stood stiffly, hands in his pockets, not crossing the threshold. "I'm not here to bother you," he said. Haley straightened. She said nothing. "I just wanted to see it. The club. You actually doing something with it." She tilted her head slightly. He swallowed. "It's good. It's useful for people." A long pause hung between them. "I might come next time," he added, "if that's allowed." Haley studied him. His face wasn't arrogant. It was unsure. For the first time, not performative. "Everyone's allowed," she said. He nodded, stepped back, and disappeared down the hall. The next week, he came. He didn't speak much. He stayed at the edge. But he listened. He tried. 2 sessions later, Chad showed up too. He never said a word, but he offered to help set up the mats. Jason didn't come, but he no longer dominated the lunchroom. He now sat quietly, eating with a small group, and his phone left on the table. He had stopped filming people. He didn't make memes. He didn't apologize either. But sometimes change didn't announce itself. Sometimes it unfolded silently. The club grew. By the second month, it had over 30 members. The school installed a new bulletin board with the club's schedule and emergency contact flyers. A banner appeared over the gym door. "Zero tolerance for harassment begins here." One afternoon, Lena appeared in the doorway again. This time she wasn't alone. She carried a bag of bottled water and a box of energy bars. "I thought people might need snacks," she said, not quite meeting Haley's eyes. Haley smiled just slightly. "Thanks." Lena handed her the bag, her fingers brushing Haley's. "I never said anything," Lena added quietly, "about the video. You didn't need to. I didn't want anyone to know it was me, but I had to do something." Haley nodded. "I know." They stood for a long moment, surrounded by the faint echoes of students warming up on the mats. "You want to help?" Haley asked. "I don't know any techniques," Lena said. "You knew how not to look away," Haley replied. "That's enough." From then on, Lena became a regular fixture, helping organize, handing out supplies, occasionally assisting with note-taking for younger students. She never took credit. She never needed to. And somewhere along the way, the school changed. Not because of a single video, not because of a speech or punishment, because the silence broke, because people started to see, and once you see, you can't unsee. The world didn't become safe overnight, but it became less complicit. And Haley? She no longer moved like someone trying to vanish. She moved like someone who belonged. 3 months passed. Winter had crept in gently over Liberty Ridge, its sharp winds softened by golden afternoons and the rhythmic crunch of leaves underfoot. Though the campus still bore the same polished brick and manicured paths, something had shifted within its walls. The change was not loud. It did not announce itself in assemblies or speeches, but it was there, in the longer glances exchanged in hallways, in the quieter tone of conversations, in the spaces where attention once lived. Haley felt it most during the in-between moments. She noticed how students passed her now without a smirk or a whisper, how her locker remained untouched, how the meme forums had grown quieter, the snide comments replaced with actual questions and requests for study help or club announcements. There was still a kind of caution in the air, especially around her. But it was no longer the kind of silence that isolates. It was the kind that respects. One morning, on her way to the gym, she noticed the bulletin board outside the library had changed. The bright, over-designed posters about student elections and sports scores had been rearranged. At the center now was a new laminated sign: "Safe Zone, no harassment. No recording without consent. No exceptions." Beneath it were strips of paper with local and national helpline numbers, and at the bottom, printed in bold text, "We stand with students who speak up." She stood looking at it for a long time until a quiet voice reached her from behind. "I thought it was overdue." Lena stood a few feet away, a stack of books in her arms, her red headphones hanging around her neck as always. She looked different these days, more upright. Her eyes didn't dart away as quickly, and her voice no longer dropped to a whisper when others approached. She still moved carefully, but it no longer felt like avoidance. It felt like choice. Haley turned to her, offering a small smile. "It's good. I was thinking of starting a student media forum, something honest. No gossip, no filters, just perspective." Haley nodded. "You should." Lena shifted the books to one arm. "You'd be welcome to write for it, or speak, if you wanted." "I'll think about it." They stood there for a moment, the noise of students filing into the building humming around them. Lena cleared her throat. Do you ever wish none of it had happened? Haley didn't answer right away. She looked past Lena out the window, where a group of freshmen practiced basic grappling drills on the lawn under Trevor's supervision. The sight still felt surreal. Trevor laughed as one of the smaller girls managed to slip out of his hold and knock him off balance. The girl's face lit up, and he raised his hands in mock defeat. There was nothing performative in it. No sarcasm, just simple humility. No, Haley said at last. I wish it hadn't needed to happen, but if it had to, I'm glad it ended this way. Do you think they've really changed? Lena asked. Haley looked at her. Do you? Lena hesitated, then gave a small shrug. I think we all changed, even me. Haley nodded. Especially you. They walked side by side toward the gym. Inside, the mats had already been unrolled. The self-defense club had become a fixture now, more than a dozen regulars, with new faces appearing each week. It was no longer just about protection. It had become a space for confidence, for trust, for something stronger than fear. That afternoon, after the session ended and the last student had left, Lena lingered by the edge of the mat. She watched Haley wipe down the equipment, her movements fluid and efficient. I've been thinking, she said, maybe I should try one of the moves next time. Haley paused, then straightened. I think you should. Lena laughed. No promises I'll be any good. You don't need to be good, you just need to be willing. Lena nodded. You'll show me? Of course. A few days later, Haley sat alone at the edge of the bleachers, watching students filter out after an afternoon assembly. The gymnasium buzzed with conversation, but none of it centered around her. It was the kind of normal she hadn't experienced since her first day at Liberty Ridge. She watched as Jason exited with his hands in his pockets, quiet, unnoticed. He walked differently now, slower, more internal. He glanced toward her once across the court, gave the faintest of nods, then kept walking. She didn't return the gesture. She didn't need to. After everyone had left, she remained seated, her back straight, her gaze unfocused. A familiar set of footsteps approached. You're quiet today, Chuck said, settling beside her. I'm always quiet. He smiled. You're right, but this is different. Haley looked at him, eyes narrowing playfully. You spying on me now? He shook his head. Just watching. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the echo of the school around them. The sun poured in through the high windows, stretching long, golden rectangles across the floor. You ever wonder if we handled it the right way? She asked. I do, he said honestly, but I always come back to the same thing. What's that? You didn't break anyone. You stood up. You gave others the strength to do the same. That's more than most adults can claim. Haley looked down at her hands, the same ones that had deflected, blocked, and neutralized without fury. The same hands that now corrected other students' posture, offered support, steadied trembling shoulders. I don't want to be remembered for what I did in those stairs, she said quietly. I want to be remembered for what came after. Chuck turned to her. Then keep walking forward. People can't follow someone standing still. Later that week, she returned to the library after hours to help Lena set up for the New Media Forum's first open mic event. A few students were already gathered, some nervously adjusting their notes, others chatting in hushed tones. There were no cameras, no anonymous posts, just a microphone and a circle of chairs. When her turn came, Haley stood slowly, her heart beating steady but loud in her chest. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't read from a paper. She looked at the group. I used to think being quiet made me safe, she said, that if I said nothing, no one could use my words against me. She took a breath. But silence can be a wall or a bridge, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is break it. No applause followed, only stillness. And then, slowly, nods. Not performative, not exaggerated, just understanding. After the event, as they packed away the chairs and folded the sign-in sheets, Lena approached her with a grin. "You really don't like speeches, do you?" "Not really." "Well, you should consider doing more. Maybe not speeches, just talking." Haley laughed. "Maybe." On their walk home, the sky stretched dark and open above them. The stars blinked quietly overhead, and the air was crisp but not cold. Haley's steps were light, her head high. When they reached the house, Chuck was on the back porch, polishing an old wooden sword from his training days. He looked up as she approached, one brow raised. "Good night?" he asked. Haley dropped her bag by the stairs. "Yeah?" He nodded. "Learn anything new?" She paused. "I think I've stopped avoiding people's eyes." "And if someone looks at you the wrong way?" She smiled faintly. "Then I'll stand taller." "And if they don't stop?" Her gaze turned sharp. "Then I'll teach them how." The next morning, in the stillness of the school library, Lena arranged a new display of student essays under a hand-lettered title, "Finding Our Voices." The glass doors glinted with soft light. At the center was Haley's quote, printed in bold, "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is break the silence." Liberty Ridge would not forget the events of that fall, but it would not be remembered for its failures alone. It would be remembered for what followed, for what students built in place of silence, and for the girl who stood still just long enough for everyone else to stop, look, and decide, for the first time, who they really wanted to be. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos. You won't want to miss what's coming next. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it.